Hi, welcome back to Paul's Stuff. It's my space on YouTube where I get to talk about all the things I love. Lots of Star Wars, lots of lightsabers, and today is about lightsabers, but it's another one of those technical videos looking at how to work with, in this instance, the new Zeno 3 soundboard from Nexus. And today we're going to look at what's on the SD card. These boards come with a little SD card that you can plug into your computer, and all of the sound files and the fonts and things like that are on there. We're going to have a look at that today. But just before we get into that, I'm going to swap to looking at computer screen in a moment. But before we get into that, there's a couple of things that I wanted to run through with you about working with the SD card. So the first is when you come to remove your SD card, the SD card will be on the core on the board in the core on your Saber. You may need to find some videos on how to dismantle your core. I know Padawan Outpost are currently posting a number of videos on how to dismantle different cores, different sabers to get at the core. But once you've got to your core, there's a couple of things to remember. First is when you're doing anything with the saber at all, take the battery out. Don't take the card out without taking the battery out. It may not cause problems at all, but I have seen it cause some problems with the old Xenopixel V2s. And it's always best practice to take the battery out. Just be careful when you put the battery back in that you get the polarity of the battery right. Because I do know from bitter experience, if you put the battery in the wrong way round, these boards are toast. They don't survive having the polarity reversed on them. So that's the first thing to be aware of. The second thing to be aware of is if you're working with the SD card from any saber at all, really, make a backup of the SD card before you start working on it. Before you do anything else, copy the contents of the SD card, stick it in a folder on the desktop of your computer or on another memory stick or something like that, so that you've got a copy of the contents of your SD card before you start. Whenever I get a new saber, I always make a copy of the SD card and keep that on file, so that if I ever want to go back to it, or if I sell the saber or whatever, I can put it straight back to where it was when I first got it. So yeah, that's really important. Make a backup of your SD card. If you don't, and you do lose the files that are on there, you will have to go back to whoever sold you the saber and ask them to provide the files again. You can get the settings folder for the Zeno 3 on the Dark Wolf page. Dark Wolf Custom Sabers are co-developers of this board, and all of the latest information is on their support page for the Zeno 3, which I'll leave a link to in the description. It's the place to go to for information on the Zeno 3 at the moment. So you can get the settings folder, but you will not be able to get the font folders unless you go back to your original vendor and get them from there. So that's the public service safety announcement bit done. Let's get onto the computer and have a look at what's on the SD card. Hi, so this is what you will find on the SD card on a Zeno 3 lightsaber. So this isn't actually an SD card from a Zeno 3, this is a file that I keep on my desktop. This is the SD card from a baselit version of the Zeno 3. So the Zeno 3 is now capable of doing baselit and NeoPixel. And as you'll see later on, we have a new setting in the config file which will swap that from one to the other. But this is basically what you will find on the SD card when you open it. So you'll have a number of numbered fonts, numbered folders. Those are the font folders. And each one of those will have a different sound font in it. You can go above 34, that's absolutely fine. I don't think there's any upper limit on them. You can have less than 34. Most of my sabers are set up with 3 or 4. So yeah, this is the layout of the folders that you'll find when you go there. So we've got these numbered folders. We'll just click into one of those and we'll see what's inside the folder. So anyone that's been inside the SD card of a XenoPixel V2 will know this format. This is exactly the same format. The only difference being this folder has been renamed to setting. It was called set in the XenoPixel V2. So when you go into one of these folders, again, if you've been into a V2 font folder, these will be familiar. But there are some new files that are in here because of some of the new functions on the Xeno 3. I'm going to draw your attention first of all to this little text file down at the bottom. Most of the font folders that come on Xeno 3 lightsabers now will have one of these little text files. It tells you what the font is. So if you click into it, you can see here this font is called Truly Lost. It's a Dark Kestis inspired font and it's by Repulse Collectibles. So most of the font folders now have one of those little text files in them, so you can tell what the font is that you're looking at from inside the font folder, which is quite nice, quite handy. Something I've been doing with my own fonts for a little while now. So if we look up at the files that are in this folder, these first 3 are new to the Xeno 3. So begin drag, begin lock, begin melt, fairly self-explanatory. There's a file that plays at the beginning of the drag effect, beginning of the lock-up effect, beginning of the melt effect. Blaster and Clash are exactly the same as they were in the XenoPixel V2. Drag is the same as in the XenoPixel V2. That plays while you're doing the drag effect. End drag, end lock, end melt, once again new to the Xeno 3, and these are files that play at the end of those effects. Font is the same. This is the file that plays to announce the font.
Truly Lost.
And then Force is the same. Those of you that have watched my video on customizing XenoPixel V2 will know that it's the Force files that I use for quotes from the characters. So I change these out for quotes from the characters. You can have as many as you like, you just need to number them in order. When you are working with XenoPixel fonts, it's really important to get the right name for the file and then have a space and then have the number in brackets. If you don't do all of that, the sound file won't work with the saber. It won't recognize the file. So Force are basically the same as the V2. Hum is the same. In is the same. That's the retraction sounds. Lock is used on the V2 as well. Melt is a new one because obviously we've now got the melt feature. Out is the ignition sounds. So you can see here we've got 4 different ignition sounds, and from what I can tell, the Xeno 3 will play those randomly. So when you turn the saber on, it will randomly play one of those 4 sounds. And the same with all of these effect sounds that have multiple versions of the same file. Spin is new. This is a sound that is used when you're spinning the saber. It recognises when you're doing that and plays that. Stab are new files as well. They play when you stab the saber without using the mount or the lightning block function. Should actually say, you may find in some fonts that they actually have another file in this begin line called begin lightning block, and there'll be an end lightning block, and there'll be a lightning block file as well. Those are required for the lightning block feature. So this saber with this sound font activated, I don't think will play the lightning block feature. But if you have those files in, it will. That brings us on to the swing files. So now you can see there are 3 different types. So we have swing, we have swing H, and we have swing L. And those are for the accent swings. So we've got a main set of swing files, sound files, and then swing H and swing L provide the accent sounds. Another type of file you may find in here is a track file. If you don't have any track files in the font folder, then when you have that font activated, the saber will not play any tracks, any sound tracks. If you have track folders in here, it will, and they're exactly the same. They're called track, space, open brackets, number, close brackets. You can have as many of those as you like, and the saber will play through them in order from 1 to whatever the last one is, and then it will go back to 1. So that's the contents of one of the font folders for a Xeno 3. Now, some of the things I've been asked about, one of the things I've been asked about with the new Xeno 3 is, are Xeno 3 fonts able to be used with XenoPixel V2? And the answer is yes. You can use a Xeno 3 font with a XenoPixel V2 saber. You can use a XenoPixel V2 font with a Xeno 3 saber, but not all of the files will be there, so some of the things may not work on it. So the Xeno 3 is completely backwards compatible to the V2, but the V2 may not work fully on a Xeno 3. Hope that's helpful for you. So this is the contents of one of the font folders. So our other folder here is the setting folder. As I said before, this used to be the set folder on the XenoPixel V2. And if we go into that, this is where all the sound files are held for what I like to call the system functions of the saber. So things like low battery levels, blade effects, charging, all of those sort of sound effects where the saber says something to you or tells you something. This is where all of those are held. And it's very similar to the V2. There are a lot more files in here because, for example, the blade lighting effects,
standard mode,
these
velocity mode,
standard blade modes, there are now I think the first 12 are the ones that are on the saber at the moment, but they go up to 100. So there's obviously in the mind of the developers that they'll be adding more in the future. Similarly with light effects, there's lots of those now. but most of these are going to be the sounds that you hear when
charging,
certain effects take place. So
exit multi-lock mode,
they're there. There are some new ones because of the new effects, but generally it's pretty much, in terms of the sound files that are in here, the same as the Xenopixel V2. We'll have a look at the config file in a moment. The only other files that you may find in here are the update files. When you're updating the Sabre, if you're doing that manually rather than through the app, then you put a file into this folder, and when you put the card back into the Sabre, it tells it to update and gives it the information it needs. There isn't one of those in here at the moment, but this is the folder you would put those in if you were doing that manually. So the meat and potatoes of this folder is really the config file, and this is where all the settings are for the system, basically, on your Sabre. So it's a text file, and you can edit it in any text editor. You just need to open it in a text editor. Really important, before you change anything on your SD card at all, there's a warning at the top here. It says make a backup. Make a copy of this before you change anything in it at all. And really, really wise to do that. If you lose any of these files, you will have to go back to the people that sold you the Sabre and hope that they will give you replacement files for it. I don't think there's anyone around that will just give you the files because you say you've got a Sabre. You'd need to prove to somebody that you bought it from them, generally, in order to get these files back. That said, the setting folder is available on Darkwolf as a download at the moment. That's Darkwolf Custom Sabres, which I'll leave a link to in the description. Their help page for the Xeno 3 is kind of the go-to place at the moment for information on Xeno 3, and certain things are available on there. What you won't get is a download of all the folders. So please, before you do anything on your SD card at all, make a backup copy of it and save it on your computer or somewhere where you know it is. So we'll run through this. I'll run through it as quickly as I can. The first line is date that this was created. So this is from January the 11th, 2023. May have changed a little bit since then because things are being developed all the time with this system. It is a brand new system, and I think there's lots of development work going on at the moment with it. The next line, I mentioned earlier that the Xeno 3 will do RGB baselit and NeoPixel. And you have to wire it differently. Obviously you need different hardware attached to the board in order for that to happen, but you also need to change this line in the config file. So this is basically the switch for either RGB or pixel. So at the moment this is set to 0, and that means it's RGB. If it was a 1, then it would be set up for a pixel, and this is telling the board what hardware is attached to it really and how it needs to work. So that's where you would come on to the SD card in order to set the board up for either pixel or RGB. The next line, you'll see from all the way through this config file, there are handy little reminders above each line to tell you what they are. The next line is the main blade pixel length, or main blade length. It's done in pixel count, so a 36-inch blade is 132, a 32-inch blade is 114, and a 28-inch blade is 99 or 100. And you set that figure for the length of your blade, although now you can do all of that in the app as well. The Xeno 3 has a Bluetooth app which connects to it, and one of the things you can do in that is set the blade length. Excuse me there, that's just emails coming in. I should have put do not disturb on. I'll just pop that on now, and then we won't get any more of that. Sorry about that. So yeah, that's the main blade length, and then we've got the side blade length. So this is like if you had a Kylo Ren crossguard blade with two smaller blades on the side. This is where you can set the length of those. Oddly, this one is set up to have 36-inch side blades. That would be interesting. But yeah, normally this figure will be either 0 if you haven't got any, or it will be a lot lower if you've got the small side cross guards on. And then the next line, you can set a delay time for them to follow the main blade. So this is set up for 200 milliseconds. Everything timing wise on this config file is done in milliseconds. So there's 1,000 milliseconds to a second. So this is set to 200 milliseconds. What that means is the side blades will start to ignite 200 milliseconds after the main blade. So that's 0.2 of a second after the main blade. And you can adjust that. It says here the default is 1,000, but this has come set at 200. So you can fiddle with that if you have side blades to see what happens with that. It's a very specific thing to sabers that have side blades. The volume, if you've been into the config on a Zenopixel V2, you'll know that there were 2 volumes. It was a little bit confusing. That's all gone now. Now we just have one figure for the volume, and it's a percentage. So 0 to 100. 100 is max volume. 0 is the least volume or mute. And it gives you a warning that 100 is the highest. And if you go any higher than 100, it may damage your speaker, and they won't honour your warranty if you've done that. So yeah, just leave it at 100, and you can change the volume now as a percentage in the Bluetooth app as well. So it's less relevant having it here really. Next one is brightness. Again, this is a feature that you can change on the app, but you can also set in here. So again, it's done as a percentage. Percentage 100 being the most bright the blade can go, and 0 being the blade off. The LEDs are off in the blade. I'm not sure if that only works for Pixel. It may just be a Pixel only feature. It may not work on baselit, but it may do. I don't know. Flash on clash control. So some people like to turn off flash on clash rather. Can be a bit annoying sometimes. Here you can turn it on and off. So all of these switches, 0 is off, 1 is on. And you can also set the sensitivity. Comes standard as 4.5, and as it says up here, the lower the number, the easier it is to activate the clash. So the lower the number, the more sensitive the clash is. These next lines are the deep sleep timers. So after a certain amount of time, the saber will go into deep sleep mode. When you power it on from deep sleep, you need to hold the button for 1000 milliseconds. That's 1 second. So in order for it to wake from deep sleep, you need to hold it for a second. You can manually put it into deep sleep. So when you've got the blade on, you press and hold the button to turn the blade off. Once the blade goes off, you keep pressing the button, and after 10 seconds it'll go into deep sleep mode. And you can set the amount of time that you have to hold the button for. By default it's set for 10 seconds. Again, this is something that you can now adjust on the app. I think the minimum amount of time that you can that you will need to press the button for is 6 seconds. Motion control, so we've got a master switch for the motion control, so this will turn all of the motion control on or off. Again, 0 or 1 depending on whether it's off or on. So this is set to 1, so the motion control is on. And then we've got separate control and sensitivity for all of the different motion controls. So push pull on, push pull off, and the sensitivity of the push pull. The sensitivity of the push pull can be important because it, as well as controlling the on off push pull, it also controls the two new features of lightning block and melt. At the moment, all of the push-pull motion controls, including the sensitivity, you can adjust on the app. We've then got swing on motion control. There's an on-off switch for that and a sensitivity control for that, and twist on, twist off, and sensitivity for twist. Now, at the moment, the swing on and the twist motion controls aren't adjustable in the app, but I think that will be coming in time. There seems to be facility in the app for that to come in the future, but as of the time of me making this video, that isn't available. So yeah, that's the motion controls. These are the timings for the ignition styles that you can set. So this will say how long the lighting effect for the ignition preons will come on for. I wouldn't touch those. They've been set by Nexus to be matched to the ignition styles that are there. Don't see any need to change those really, unless of course you're putting your own custom sounds and things in, and then you might want to match the lighting effect to the sound. Next line is another new one. This is as it says, on inserting the SD card back on board, Sabre will begin from the correct font. 0 means off, 1 means on. I've just had this on. I don't honestly know quite what it means, but I have it on 1 and it comes up with the first font every time I turn it on. So after I've taken the SD card out, so that's yeah, I just leave that at 1. We've got a whole series of blade mode switches. So we've got a new torch mode, velocity mode, multi-block mode, multi-lock mode, lightning block mode, blaster mode, and ghost mode. These are all now switchable, so if you don't want them on, you don't have to have them on. I quite honestly found blaster mode and ghost mode on the V2 really not much use at all, but they were always there. You had to cycle through them. Now you can turn them off if you want to. So the only one I have on here is lightning block. The torch mode, the blade will work like a flaming torch. So if you hold the blade upright, the whole of the blade will light up. But as you turn it off to the side, the blade will come down. It's supposed to look a bit like a flaming torch, I believe. And velocity mode, when you first turn the Sabre on, about half the blade will light, and then the quicker you move the blade, the more of the blade will light. So it's reacting to the velocity of the blade. Multi-block mode I haven't been able to get to work. Multi-lock mode is a mode where you can, if you go into lock-up mode and then press the button again for 1 blink of the button or 1 beep, it will go into multi-lock mode. It will tell you that it's done it. The blade will then come out of the lock-up mode, and the next time you clash the blade, it will go back into lockup mode, and it will keep doing that until you turn it off. You turn it off by having it in the lockup mode and pressing the button for one flash stroke bleep again. So potentially useful, but maybe a little bit limited in its utility. As I say, the multi-block I haven't been able to get to work at all. But you can turn all of those on or off here. And again, same sort of switch process, 0 for off, 1 for on. This next line is fantastic. One of the problems with the V2 was always that the menus are based on a light in the switch blinking, and if you've got either a plunger type switch or a control box, you haven't got a light in the switch to blink, so you don't ever know really where you're going to go into the menu. And what they've done is fix that by putting in, now there's an audible cue as well, there's a bleep, so when the light in the button flashes, the saber will also bleep. But you may not want that on if you've got an LED in the button, so you can turn that on or off, and that's here. That's this countdown line. Again, 0 off, 1 on. That'll be on most of my sabers because it's really handy. So even if you've got a lit button, if you've got your whole thumb over the button, you can't always see it, you will always be able to hear the bleep. So next we come down to font specific settings. So each of these lines relates to one of those font folders that we saw earlier. You can see there are 34 of them, the same number as the font folders, and this tells the saber how to behave, how the blade should behave in that font. So if we have a look at this first line, this is font 1, so this relates to the font that's in folder 1, and then we have 3 figures in brackets afterwards, and this sets the color of your blade. So these figures relate to red, green and blue. 0 is none of that color, 255 is the most of that color you can have. So if we look at this one, this is 0, so there's no red, 0, no green, 255, all blue. So this is a blue blade, and we can tell that from looking at these 3 figures. There are websites you can go to get specific codes for different colors, although that is a little bit redundant with the Xeno 3, because now you can use the app to pick pretty much any color you want, or set any color you want. You have that facility now in the app as well, so you can do that here, but you can also do that in the app. The next figure along, this is what they're calling the default hum light effect. So this is the basic effect that the blade will have when you turn it on. So we have options for fire blade, steady blade, unstable blade, rainbow blade, candy blade, crack blade, pulse blade, and a new one is flashing blade. So each of those has a number from 0 to 7, and whichever number you put in this first figure on its own here, that's what the default hum light effect will be for that font. This one's set up for a steady blade. So if you wanted this to have a pulse blade, you would put a 6 in there. It's fairly straightforward. These next 4 are all for light effects. So on the V2 you couldn't select the different light effects. There was a set one for blaster block, there was a set one for lockup, there was a set one for flash on clash, there was a set one for force. But now you can change all of those, and there's 3 options for each one. So 0, 1 or 2, you can do that with all of these next 4 figures. First one is the blaster block, the next one is the force light effect, the next one is the lock-up light effect, and the next one is the flash on clash light effect. So you can select from one of 3 options for all of those now. You'll have to play with it yourself to find out what those effects look like. It would be an enormously long video for me to go through now all the options that are on here. This last single figure, that's the default style of the blade. So standard blade, velocity blade, torch blade, blaster mode, ghost mode, or any of the ignition styles. So that's things like the broken ignition, photon ignition, phaser ignition, hunter ignition, all of those. They're controlled by this last figure, and you can put in anything from 0, which is a standard blade, which is what this one is set up for, right the way up through to 11. And that will change your blade style or ignition style. These last 3 figures are the ignition time. So this is the time it will take for the light effect to go from the hilt to the tip of the blade when you ignite the blade, and retraction time, the time it will take to go from the tip of the blade back to the hilt when you turn the blade off. So that's all pretty self-explanatory. All of these first settings, apart from the 2 timing settings at the end, you can now do in the app as well. You can change those on the app, and it will alter this config file basically to reflect that. So you can set the defaults for all of these in the app as well now. If you add a font, you do need to add a line for it. And likewise, I always like if I subtract fonts. So as I said earlier, most of my custom setups have only got 2 or 3 fonts in, so you'll see that the configs for those only have 4 lines here rather than 34. Each line here relates to a numbered folder on the SD card, which is a font folder. So the last line that we have here is a new line. It's end. So end equals 1 means the end of the config file, and the Sabre won't recognize anything that is then written underneath that. So it just tells it where the end of the config file is. We'll just close that back. So that's what you will find on the SD card on the Xeno 3. Not complicated, and if you've worked with the Xenopixel V2 at all, it is very similar to the Xenopixel V2. There are just some extra options for the extra features. Although now, as I say, with the Xeno 3, you now have the option of changing an awful lot of these settings on the app as well. So I'll just go back and we'll finish this video up. Okay, so welcome back to me in the chair. That is the contents of the Xeno 3 SD card and what you can expect, all the things you can change. I have to say, a lot of what you used to have to do on the SD card with the Xenopixel V2 you can now do via the Bluetooth app that you can get that connects to the Xeno 3. That will make life a lot easier. I think eventually you may even be able to add fonts and things through it. I'm not sure. It's really not fully developed at all yet, but as time goes on that will be developing further, and from what I've seen of it so far, it's only going to get better and better. I have done a video on the Xeno 3 generally, which looks at the app and how that works. It's not perfect yet, but it is very good, and as I say, it's going to get better. But for now, that's the contents of the SD card and how you can change things on the SD card if you want to. Those of you that have looked at a Zenopixel V2 SD card, it is very, very similar. They've kept all of they've kept a lot of it familiar to people that have worked with Zenopixel V2. If you've worked with a Zenopixel V2, you'll pick up the Zeno 3, no problem at all. If you're completely new to Zenopixel or now the Zeno 3, then if you've never worked on a Zeno board before, the Zeno SD card before, I think you'll pick it up fairly quickly. It's pretty intuitive. It's fairly straightforward. And if, as I said right at the beginning, if you've got a backup of the files, you can play away to your heart's content. If you make a mistake, you can always go back to where you started. Always, always, always make a backup of the SD card before you do anything on it. So yeah, that's today's video. I hope that's been helpful for you. Another one of those more technical videos, I guess. But I wanted to get a video out looking at this Zeno 3 SD card as soon as possible, because I know people are going to be buying them and are going to want to know the information on them. So hopefully that's helpful for you. If you like the video, then please give it a thumbs up. That tells YouTube that you like this sort of content from me, and makes it more likely that my content will get seen by other people in the future. If you haven't already, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It's growing at a good pace at the moment. I think we're around 375 or so at the moment, members. So it'd be great if we got a few more. If you like the content, if you want to see more of it, please subscribe to the channel and then click the notification bell, and that will tell you when I'm putting new videos up. As I learn more about the Zeno 3, I will be making more videos about it. I've already got a first look video up on it, and actually an update to the first look as well, because there were some things in there that I missed or that weren't entirely accurate. So have a look at those two if you're interested in Zeno 3 as well. But for now, that's all I've got to say today. So I'll say cheerio.